And so, of course, Charlie Munger is a kind of sort of a half deity in the world of value investing. So it's a very good place to start this conversation from. But before we do that, my first question for you, Stephen, how does someone decide to become the world's expert in Hong Kong immigration law? It doesn't strike me as something that sort of a typical career goal that someone in his 20s would think that's what I want to specialize in. I'm sure that life sometimes brings you to choose one road over another, and you end up specializing in a very narrow field. And one thing that I'd be really curious to know about is how did Hong Kong immigration enter your life?
The first real lesson in business that I had was about 94, something like that. I'd been in practice straight out of the law school, starting in 1993. And I looked around and I could see that I was, at that point, as a legal consultant, I was really just being a sort of a poor man's alternate to a solicitor, charging on the basis of my time. And I just thought that was a really poor business model. It didn't jive with me completely. So then I read a book by Al Ries called Focus. And in that book, I learned that to be successful, you need to specialize in one thing. And I was doing all these other things at the time as a legal consultant. I was incorporating companies, doing trademarks, advising on labor law, this kind of stuff, and doing some immigration at the same time. And when it came to me that I should be focusing, I looked around in the marketplace to see if there's anybody that was actually positioning themselves in the immigration business, and there wasn't. It was all kind of ad hoc at that point, other professionals doing it. So the book Focus made me realize that I need to focus on one thing. So that's really how that came about. At the same time, I had a client who was Japanese, and she was in public relations, and she told me that if I wanted to be successful in the Japanese community, and most of our clients were Japanese way back then, 93, 94, 95, what I should do is write a book on immigration and then become the de facto expert in it. So around about this time I was experiencing the need to scale this, what has now become an immigration business, and I thought, well, if I'm going to bring young graduates into the practice, I need to teach them what this discipline's all about, so I need to reduce it to writing at least. So I went through the process of writing that book, ostensibly to nail my position in the Japanese community when it came to Hong Kong immigration, and also to give me a scalability tool. But the Asian economic crisis then hit us, and she went bankrupt. So I was left with this book that I'd written that was serving its purpose, and it had been translated into Japanese. And about the same time that this was coming down, one of my clients was one of the first internet service providers in Hong Kong. And Ken Kawamura at that point said to me, "Have you seen this thing called the internet?" This is 96. And I looked at it, and I think, like everybody who saw the internet for the very first time, especially moving from pre-internet era to the internet era, I thought, this looks really interesting, but I don't quite understand it, because the material that I was looking at on the internet was all brochureware, and it reminded me of the phenomenon at that time. Our offices were over in Mong Kok, and I'd arrive actually in Yau Ma Tei MTR in the morning, and just as I'd leave the MTR station, there were people handing out these leaflets. And 2 or 3 steps after the MTR station, these leaflets were all on the floor. And I thought, this is just a ridiculous way to be marketing a business. And the stuff that I saw on the internet reminded me of that. It just jived with me that these things were just brochure, and there's not much interest in it, intrinsically. So I had this book, and I thought, well, what I really should do is perhaps put this book on the internet, and then use it as an opportunity for people to sort of get to know what we're all about. It also made sense to me at that time, even though it was a little bit radical, because the key problem that we had was accessing our potential marketplace. We were spending far too much money on the South China Morning Post in advertisements, and also a Japanese newspaper called the Hong Kong Post. And another problem that we had, that reaching the audience that we had was best if we could get them before they ever arrived in Hong Kong, because a lot of the problems associated with immigration can be addressed before arrival. So the internet gave us that reach. So I then made the decision that I would put the first version of the Hong Kong Visa Handbook on the internet in 1996. And really, the thing just took off at that point, and 5 years later, for all practical purposes, I'd sort of made it. So that's the kind of genesis of how I began to position myself really as being good at immigration, and then just through the passage of time, that's become consolidated.